Thank you for having us. Tonight I want to talk to you a little bit about modern threats in the modern workplace. So I'll tell you right now, this isn't about AI. If that's a disappointment, I do apologize. As Rob mentioned, I'm Shawn. I'm one of the sales engineers with Coreview. And Coreview really is about cyber resiliency, governance, and management of Microsoft 365. And we focus on Microsoft 365 because it's a big part of what pretty much what most organizations use for their productivity, right? And what I want to talk to you about is, I want to give you a few takeaways and why Microsoft 365 deserves your attention as security professionals is top of the list. And we'll talk through a number of use cases, a number of situations that I hope is going to leave you with that takeaway. So why visibility is critical in Microsoft 365. It's a very decentralized platform, and visibility isn't really the easiest thing when managing Microsoft 365. When I say visibility, I mean visibility of things like tenant configurations, right? Those configs that have changed, the new configs that come out, and configurations that are deleted. And we'll talk about why those are very important and why visibility of those things is extremely important. Visibility of things like stale user accounts, right? Users that aren't logging into your M365 environments that your teams manage and what threats those pose. User accounts that don't have registered MFA devices. So you have active users, but they don't have registered MFA devices. That's a serious threat. It's an actively exploited threat by not kitty hackers, but nation state hackers like APT29 or Cozy Bear or Midnight Blizzard, whatever you want to call them. They actively leverage these types of vectors, and that's why they deserve your focus. And then enterprise applications as well, before I move forward. Enterprise applications in Microsoft, in Entra specifically, these are kind of the wild, wild west. And we like to think of enterprise apps as what service accounts were 10, 15 years ago, right? Breach vectors just waiting to happen. And then the importance of tenant configuration management and backup and recovery. This is a very, very key overlooked aspect of Microsoft 365, right? Tenant configurations are what control access to your environment. And if they're not backed up and you don't have a way to recover them, that is a threat. So, why does Microsoft 365 deserve your attention as security professionals? Simply because there are a lot of security risks out there in M365. I'm not going to rattle this entire list off to you, but I want to point out a few key areas. Let's see if this works. Oh, it does. So collaboration and identity risks in the top left, right? Unused Teams groups, files shared externally, SharePoint and anonymous sharing, those types of things. Entra applications, right? Service principals, Entra app registrations. OAuth consent phishing happens through these types of applications, and they really do deserve our attention as security professionals, right? Identity and privilege, let's go back to that. I'm gonna get this pulled back up again here real quick. That was my bad. Down in the bottom left, we had identity risks, and we'll tag on that real quickly here. So identity privilege exposure, right? Users without MFA, weak passwords, we all know about that. Everybody's dealing with that, but there's still a threat, and there's still an actively exploited threat. Global admin proliferation, or just heavily permissioned Entra role assignments that proliferate through our organizations. Those are key things we need to track, and Entra app privileges down there. Then we'll talk about, over on the right-hand side, tenant configuration risks, right? Conditional access policy, cross-tenant access policies, DLP configurations, ATP threat management. All of these things need to have our eyes on them. We need to be able to be notified when they drift away from our desired state baseline, and we'll dig into some of that. So there's a lot of risks out here in M365, and it really does deserve our focus. Because Microsoft tenants are exposed just by default. So we have a few numbers up here, and we'll talk through these real quickly. 71% of Microsoft 365 tenants face 7 successful account takeovers per year. That's a pretty high number. It only takes one of those to make you front page news and be a resume generating event, right? 79% increase in configuration tampering during attacks on Microsoft environments. So that's pretty big. Bad actors get in the house. The first thing they want to do is tamper with configurations to create backdoors, extend dwell time, and maximize the blast radius, if you will. And then from Microsoft themselves, 63% of Microsoft 365 orgs are failing to implement the privilege of least, the principle of least privilege, right? Oftentimes we have organizations that are using PIM to elevate accounts to be able to manage the environment. That's great, that's fantastic, but they're PIMing up to roles like Exchange Administrator to make an email address change in the environment. That's a heavy hitter role to PIM up to and have those permissions for hours, if not days, and that's a breach vector, right? Even worse, I work with a lot of customers that PIM up to the global admin role on a regular basis for their admin users, and those admin users have a mailbox. So they're open to phishing attacks while they have a global admin role assignment. That's a breach vector. So Microsoft themselves tells us that 63% of those orgs are failing in least privilege. So let's talk about the timeline of a breach, if we will. So it starts with tenant compromise, right? Accounts without MFA, conditional access issues, or Entra apps with extensive access and privileges, right? Bad actors get in the house. From there, they tamper with configurations. Entra configs, Defender configs, Intune configs, turn off auditing of mailboxes, those types of things. Privilege elevation and lateral movement. Right? From there, they do the usual things that they do. They find privileged accounts, create privileged accounts, register additional Entra apps. So that eventually, we find those folks, we shut down that access, close down the account, change passwords, reset MFA, all that good stuff. We've booted the bad actor out. Then we have to go about the incident response and recovery process to reconfigure Entra, reconfigure Intune, reconfigure Defender, etc. If we don't have a backup of our tenant configurations, a lot of times that has to be done from memory. And I don't know too many admins that are able to remember all of the conditional access policies, all of the settings they have, all of the DLP policies, all of those types of things. So backing up configurations is key there. Adapt and improve. From there, we improve our policies, remove unnecessary access, implement processes, etc. So that's kind of the timeline of a breach. It's nothing new. That's what happens in breaches, right? And this is why visibility and governance are critical in our M365 ecosystems. Current threat landscape, right? So password spray attacks and phishing are old school, but they're still effective. They still work. And that's why bad actors still leverage those things. Entra applications are really kind of a new frontier. As I said, these are kind of what service principals used to be, and they are proliferating. I work with customers all the time that have hundreds, if not thousands, of Entra applications in their environment, and they can't even give you an inventory of what they are, why they're there, who registered them, and what they're doing. Yes, sir?
What is an Entra application?
An Entra enterprise application is an application that gets registered into Entra, usually by third-party solutions. So you can think of things like Calendly, those types of things. They get registered in Entra as an enterprise application, but they have permissions assigned to them to be able to do things in the environment. Access mailboxes, access calendars, those types of things. The key ones to keep your eyes on here are enterprise applications that have application read-write-all permissions, directory read-write-all permissions, those types of things, because if a bad actor can register one of those in your environment, they can leverage that to get access to every mailbox in the environment, every SharePoint site in the environment, modify your Active Directory, make configuration changes, all of those types of things. So they really are a threat vector that deserves attention. Great question, thank you. So visibility, notification, and remediation, as always, are key to damage control, minimizing the blast radius when a breach does happen. Take a look at a couple of scenarios. So first up is a no-auth consent phishing attack. Bad actors breach a non-admin account, right? So a standard user, they get access to the environment. From there, they can create an app in Entra with delegated permissions, delegated to the permissions that they have with that breached account. From there, they use those permissions to see the other apps that exist in the environment. And then register or plan an OAuth spear phishing attack to target users to register their own app in the environment with additional service principals added to that. And then they can get access to additional resources, mailboxes, SharePoint sites, OneDrives, etc. So that's scenario one. Scenario two, a perpetual privileged access breach. This would involve a sophisticated admin account takeover, right? So basically a spear phishing of an admin in the environment, maybe a global admin if they're lucky, if bad actors are lucky. Once they're in the house with those high-level permissions of the account that they've breached, they can create a highly privileged app. And as we see here, this one lists out some of those permissions that I rattled off, right? Privileged access, read, write, Azure AD. That's going to give them access to modify the configurations in Entra. Application read, write, all. That would give them access to every mailbox in the environment. From there, okay, we've identified that my global admin account has been breached. The security team shuts it down. They notify my IAM team. My IAM team shuts down my account, forces a password reset, forces an MFA reset. We've effectively shut down this guy over here on the left-hand side that was breached, right? We're good to go. All's well. Not so, because bad actors still have access to this account that they registered that has these highly privileged permissions, and they still have a backdoor. They still have dwell time in the environment. So that's what that looks like. Which leads me to an actual use case, Microsoft's Midnight Blizzard breach. I'm sure everybody's familiar with this one, right? We'll step through the how this occurred. APT29 managed to run a password spraying account on weak passwords in a particular Microsoft tenant. They didn't know what tenant they were attacking. They were just breaching a Microsoft tenant. They got into a tenant that turned out to be a Microsoft legacy test tenant. They didn't know that at the time, and they got into an account in that tenant. From there, they were able to discover a legacy OAuth app in that dev tenant, which was instantiated as a service principal in the corporate tenant. And this is where that visibility is key. You have to have this visibility. If you can't see it, you can't fight it, right? That's how this works. They were also able to register additional OAuth apps in that dev tenant and create an admin in the corporate tenant, admin account in the corporate tenant, which was used to grant consents to that OAuth app in the production environment. And then they had access to every mailbox in the production environment. So that is how Microsoft themselves were breached, leveraging service principals or enterprise applications in their test and corporate tenant. Now, they've taken steps from there. I've managed to talk with a couple of Microsoft folks, and now they manage their dev tenants and their production tenants like for like. The key to managing those tenants like for like is to make sure that all of our settings are the same between our corporate tenant and our dev tenants. You know, all of our Entra settings, Exchange settings, security and compliance settings, all of those M365 settings are like for like between those two environments. And having visibility into those enterprise applications that get registered in either one. So key insights around Entra app attacks, right? Breached apps operate under the radar. If Microsoft can get burned, we can all get burned. That's how that works. If we don't have eyes on it, then they're operating under the radar. Shadow IT, if you will. Attackers create multiple apps for redundancy in these types of breaches, right? They're not relying on a single app because that app may get discovered. They'll register 3, 4, 5 of these things. And then excessive permissions and overlooked security in test tenants, right? Making sure that our tenant configurations in our prod environments and our dev tenants are like for like. So now first of all, we're developing in an environment that looks like our production environment. So whatever we create there is going to work in our prod environment. But more to the point, not overlooking those dev tenants as just, yeah, that's where we do stuff. You know what I mean? Because those are important as well. Unmanaged Entra apps impact everyone. We've talked a lot about kind of the operational side of the house here, but they really impact everyone. On the security side of the house, Entra apps are an ideal opportunity for privilege elevation and persistence, right? Extended dwell time. Insider threats, disgruntled employees. They can avoid privileged access oversight by using Entra apps in our environment. And this bottom one is interesting as well, right? Compliance failure. Every compliance standard requires least privileged access in the environment. But unmanaged Entra applications catch the orgs out in compliance audits because those aren't least privileged. On the operations side of the house, first and foremost, we have legitimate enterprise applications in Entra. Things like I mentioned, Calendly, those types of things. They're legitimate and oftentimes they're business critical. They come with certificates and secrets on those things as well, right? When critical apps are registered, they're either certificate or secret protected. And of course, those things time out, right? They have an expiration date on them. So we want to make sure that we have visibility of expiring certs and secrets before they expire so that those critical apps don't break on the operational front. Sprawl management. Unused apps should be deprovisioned. If an application isn't logging in, it's not being used, it should be deprovisioned, right? Just to keep the house clean and make sure they aren't breachable. Without visibility, without good accountability and auditing, that's impossible to do. And then ops teams for reporting on those things when they want to get that visibility, operations teams have to use PowerShell, Excel, Power BI to try and manage those basic oversights of those enterprise applications. And honestly, it's not a real feasible solution for operations teams out there. So unmanaged Entra applications, they do impact everyone. Key takeaways, right? Regular audits of not just those Entra apps, but enabled users, password changes, and I know a lot of places are going passwordless these days, but many places are not. And registered MFA is critical, right? Another breach vector, if we think back to that Midnight Blizzard breach, that account that got breached in the test environment did not have a registered MFA device, which is another threat vector that APT29 has exploited. I think the last time I heard about it has probably been last year sometime. But password spray accounts, they find an active account in Entra, they crack the password. If they find one that doesn't have an MFA device registered, they can register their own device, and now they're in the house more or less legitimately. So, regular audits, key. Visibility of enterprise applications and their permissions could have prevented the Midnight Blizzard breach, right? So had someone put eyes on all the enterprise apps out there, made sure that they were legitimate and should be there, that could have prevented that breach. And then governance of enterprise apps, stale users, and MFA registration is critical. It's kind of redundant, but we'll throw it in there.
Got a question over here.
Yeah.
Is the interest in apps by attackers down to the focus of security is mainly on user accounts?
No, so enterprise applications are a separate identity, right? You've got users, and then you have those enterprise applications registered in Entra. They're like a separate identity entirely. So it doesn't really go down to the user level, but so breachers are looking for those apps that they can either exploit that already exist, right, or registering their own, and now those apps themselves are acting as that identity to gain access to resources.
I think that's what I'm saying is that,
okay,
like corporate security is looking at user accounts.
Yes.
And the attackers are going, hey, let's go
yes,
create some fake apps.
Yes.
And security is more likely to not kill a fake app.
Right, correct. Because there's, like I said, in any medium to large size organization, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of enterprise apps registered in Entra. And they do fly under the radar because they're just hard to manage. They're hard to see and manage visibly in the admin centers in Entra. Yeah, great question. So let's shift focus a little. Yes, sir.
And just to piggyback on this, just to understand the scope on those Entra apps, all of the apps that may be add-ons in like Teams end up going through Entra too. So now, if somebody's in Teams and they go over to the store, yep, in Teams, and they see an app they want to use, it opens that ticket, and they look at it. Now all of a sudden, all of those subsidiary apps that are all just off of Microsoft Teams or Microsoft Excel or Microsoft Words are also in Intra.
Yep.
And if they don't ever use them, yeah, as security, we're not checking behind and saying, hey, who's logging into them? Is it being accessed? But those permissions, some of them are read write all, and when it's in the email especially, they have access all the way up to your CEO. If somebody's not checking those permissions and scoping them down if need be. So it could be huge, not just the main apps, but the ancillary apps as well.
The way I look at it is it's that corner menu, you know, all the dots, the square.
Mm-hmm.
If you open that up, just a standard user at your organization, that we all might be, there's all sorts of things I can choose to
Yep.
spin off and create and play around with. So if you have 1,000 users and each of them in a month creates 2 or 3, they're just playing around, and then they may create it, and then, I mean, I've probably done it. They create it and then leave it alone because they're not going to use it. So yeah, you're right. Teams, people add in
Yep.
stuff there, but you have people that are more savvy, I would call them, and they're going to that thing and they're seeing this huge grid of things they can pick, and that's really the sprawl you're talking
It is.
about.
It is. I talk to folks on the in admin teams every day, and we hit on Entra apps, and they say to me all the time, "Man, I've got thousands of these things out there. I have no idea where they came from, what they're doing, etc." So they're looking for governance of those exactly those identities. Fantastic points. Yes, sir.
Is there a way to set up if it's not used, as in a user does not click on the application within X amount of time, it gets removed from the system? Is that something that is?
We have a solution for that, actually. Yeah, we actually have a solution for that, and I'll show you a little bit about that too when we're done with. Yeah, we actually have a solution for that. Yeah, great points. Thank you. So I'd like to shift focus off of Entra apps primarily, is what we've been talking about, to tenant configurations. Right, backup and recovery are critical of these things, and so is drift detection and drift alerting, as we've kind of touched on. So, recent threat landscape. U.S. government, the FBI, CISA, U.S. Treasury have all issued multiple warnings and advisories about North Korean IT workers being hired at unsuspecting Western companies. And once those folks are hired, in the IT staff, right? So once those folks are hired, they gain access to repositories, proprietary code, and privileged systems. While many of those folks are motivated by economic needs, some have used their access to exfiltrate source code, deploy malware, and help orchestrate ransomware attacks. And one in particular, the things that were ransomed were tenant configurations. So bad actors from a North Korean state sponsor were hired into an organization that we actually worked with post-breach. Those folks got in the house and set about deleting and modifying tenant configurations. Once it was discovered what they were doing, they were approached, they fessed up, identified themselves and who they were working with, and held those configurations ransom. So, the key there is visibility into when those configs are changing, right? That's key, number one. Probably key number one is backing up those configs. Key number two is identifying when those things have been ransomed, or modified, I should say, and then having an ability to recover them in whole back to their last known good state. That organization at the bottom did not have a backup of their configurations. They were left with no option but to pay the ransom. The risk of misconfigurations. So there's a few more numbers I'll throw at you. 67% of data breaches involve misconfigurations, right? And let me linger there. And that makes a lot of sense because misconfigurations create gaps, they create doors and windows, bad actors come through those doors and windows, right? So that's pretty straightforward. McAfee tells us that 99% of misconfigurations go on undetected, right? We don't have eyes on those misconfigurations. If they're not easy to see, oftentimes we're looking at a lot of things, right? So if we can't see it easily, then they go undetected. And then 22% of organizations face compliance failure due to misconfigurations. That's a pretty big number. Not as big as 99%, but it's still a pretty big number. Configuration tampering in Microsoft 365. 79% increase in Defender configuration tampering over the last 2 years. And that speaks directly to breaches, right? So bad actors get in the house, they're going to modify those Defender configs so that they can extend dwell time and expand their breach. Improper defenses is the top 1% of prevalent MITRE attack techniques. And then Microsoft themselves tell us that 176,000 incidents involving tampering of security settings occurred in 1 month recently. That's a very large number. So configuration tampering is a real threat, and it's something we should be concerned with and have eyes on. Gartner tells us that if your main concern is around ransomware or losing access to your tenant, you'll want a solution that can monitor configuration drift. That solution should notify you that a configuration has been changed from your baseline, your desired state baseline, right? Not only do we want to know that these things are happening, we also want to be able to undo them, right? And that's the couple of points down here that we have. Automatically revert them when those drifts are detected. And as Gartner points out, there are no native functions in Microsoft 365 that can track and remediate config modifications and drift. And this is the kind of drift we're talking about, right? So this is a screenshot. It's from our solution. I'm not gonna try and hide that. This is the type of drift we're talking about. Bad actors get in the house, they set about doing certain things, right? Deleting conditional access policies at the very top. Modifying threat management policies, disabling, for instance, anti-phish policies. Modifying existing conditional access policies, maybe snapping in excluded locations so that they can exclude their location from a particular conditional access policy and expand their breach. And then disabling protection alerts at the very bottom. These are all red flags that a breach is in process, right? And without this type of visibility and the ability to recover to your last known good state, you're at risk. Different kinds of configuration drift. I've thrown that out there at you a lot, so let's take a look at this, because not all configuration drift is the same, right? We have internal misconfigurations. These are, well-intentioned admins. They make a change. It has an unintentional impact on the organization. That could be things like modifying a conditional access policy, modifying an Intune device compliance policy, etc. We have insider threat breach or misconfigurations, right? This would be malicious insiders who want to cause harm, maybe enabling cross-tenant access. Actors in your tenant who want to open doors. So bad actors get in the house, they may do things like disable Defender email filters or turn off DLP or purview auditing, etc. And then good old Microsoft every now and then pushes out an update to us, right? And this could cause a configuration drift with unintentional consequences downstream, things like Defender XDR configurations. And they may not have an instant impact, but we may see that impact Monday morning when we come in, right? So configuration drift in that midnight blizzard breach that we talked about. See how that played in here. So again, bad actors found an account without MFA. They were in the house. They identified Entra apps in the test environment, and then they authorized an app that had excessive permissions. So these were old misconfigurations that were undetected, and that's what led to that breach. And then once they were in the house, they enabled elevation into the production environment, created more apps and user accounts over in prod, and they elevated access to get access to all the mailboxes in that prod environment. Those were all new misconfigurations that went undetected. So visibility is definitely key.
I have a question.
Shoot.
Do you have an app that would foresee that before the whole program has been misfigured or?
Yes, yeah, we certainly do. Yeah, so we have a configuration backup solution that allows you to compare your configs against your desired state baseline and see where they do not align and bring them into alignment, right? So number one, helping to tighten up the ship before pre-breach, and then while the breach is occurring, you would get notification that these configurations were being changed, and you could shut it down much quicker prior to, in that previous slide, somewhere between box number 3 and box number 4, where the bad actors got access from the dev tenant to the prod tenant, you'd be able to shut that down at that point in time.
What's
So
the timeline?
the timeline, well, it kind of depends on how quick the breacher's moving, but I would say within a day we would have been able to pick up with our solution what was going on in that dev tenant prior to them moving into the prod tenant, and notify you about that and allow you to shut that down. Great question. So preventing misconfigurations, right? Microsoft tells us that it's critical that alterations to the intended configuration of a Microsoft Entra tenant are subject to robust change management. On the right-hand side, that's exactly what we need, right? We need a baseline that's applied to all the tenants that we have. If we have a test tenant and a prod tenant only, then we need a baseline that's set across both of those tenants. If we have all three, a dev, test, prod environment, again, that baseline should be applied to each one of the tenants that we manage. Config change management is impractical without the ability to basically apply that baseline. And then from there, a robust review and approve process for configurations to be changed, right? I worked, and I was guilty of it too when I was managing M365 environments. If you don't have a dev tenant, you're just kind of shotgunning that in your production environment, hoping for the best, you know?
Is there a possibility of bureaucracy getting in the way of the a release in time?
I'm sorry?
Is there a possibility of bureaucracy getting in the way of a in-time release for some of these baseline or some of these configurations?
Say bureaucracy getting in the way? Oh, there's always a possibility of bureaucracy getting in the way. Bureaucracy is great for that. Yeah, absolutely. But you know, kind of building in that robust process is going to create its own bureaucracy for sure. But it's one of those bureaucracies that you kind of have to have, right? So, Microsoft on detecting misconfigurations. So their top recommendation around maximum return on mitigation is to adhere to security config baselines, right? Again, that term baseline. And best practices when deploying and maintaining identity systems such as Entra. Effective configuration drift detection requires security configuration baselines, and I'll keep hammering on that because that's really what the gold standard is to have a desired state baseline for your M365 environment, apply that to your prod and your dev environments, and then make sure that you're aligned to that periodically. This is a key point. Microsoft does not keep backups of your configurations in Microsoft 365. We all know that we're responsible for our data backups, and there are some fantastic solutions, many of them based right here in the RTP, that back up those configurations, or that data in M365. So the emails, Teams chats, OneDrive, SharePoint documents, all of those, that data that's out there in M365. There's a lot of solutions that do that and do it well. But they don't back up your configurations. Again, conditional access policies, DLP policies, security and compliance policies, Intune policies, Intune policies, all of those types of things. And Mimecast tells us that the average medium to large size business runs about $250,000 as the average cost of Microsoft 365 downtime per hour. That's a lot of money. Without configuration backup, you could spend weeks or months having to rebuild your tenant, and during that time frame, you would experience enhanced risk exposure, right? Because as you're building out that tenant, you recover your data, you have none of your policies in place. Your data's there. Yes, your users can access that policy, but so can bad actors, or that data, but so can bad actors. With configuration backup, you can restore your tenant quickly in a matter of hours, right? Get your business back up and running again with your best practice configs in place. So I'll touch on the audit front again. We recently worked with a large European financial services firm with over 5,000 staff. They came to Coreview with a backup problem. They had failed an audit, a compliance audit, because they had an inability to restore their tenant configurations. That meant their DR process would take far too long, and they were out of compliance for their audit. They came to us, and now they're able to back their tenant up. They can restore in a timely fashion. They're good to go on their compliance audit. So what does a mature Microsoft 365 configuration management process look like? So first and foremost, we want to prevent misconfigurations in the tenant with a robust change management process around configurations. We want to baseline our tenant with those configs, and we want to detect drift when it happens. From there, we need to respond to that drift, right? We need an opportunity to be able to roll back to our last known good state, kind of like with data, same thing, right? And then that's where configuration backup and restore comes into place under the resilience bubble.
Since everything is on the cloud, what if the cloud has been breached? How do you get that back down if it's already breached?
Gotcha, that's a great question. So think of it as a digital smoking hole event, if you will, right? Your M365 tenant is beyond compromised and you just don't have faith in it anymore and you have to recover to a brand new tenant. That's kind of what we're talking about. You would stand up a brand new tenant and go about reconfiguring it the way you had it before. Without a solid backup and a means to restore those configurations, you're left again with doing it from memory, trying to recreate thousands of configurations. That's where a backup and restore process comes into place, because you can take that backup from your old tenant, apply it to your new tenant, and now you're good to go. Or if you just had a large chunk of configurations in your tenant and you didn't want to recover to a green field, so to speak, you could do it in place in your M365 space. Cyber resilience critical elements. Again, tenant configuration, backup, and recovery. Configuration drift detection and notification. So you'd get notified when those critical configs change. And Microsoft 365 visibility, right? Visibility into enterprise applications, inactive licensed users, and users without MFA registered devices. And finally, the zero trust administration model, being able to make sure that our admins have just the permissions they need to do the job at hand and not global admin roles, or maybe not the Exchange admin role just to make a simple change to a mailbox. Takeaways. Back to our first slide. So I hope I've demonstrated why M365 deserves your attention. Yes, sir.
So are we in the concept of discovering that there's configuration drift? Are we comparing the configuration, maybe say in a hash to the current hash of the current configuration, or is it an API call, or how is that done?
I've got a quick demo I can run you through right after this if you'd like. What we do is we back up our customers' configs. And at the end of each one of those backups, we compare that output against the previous backup. And if there's any change between the two, we send out a notification and tell you exactly what configurations have changed, what the change was, and we have a simple portal, a recovery portal, to be able to fall back to that last known good state and undo those changes.
Right, so that wouldn't be a hash, because the hash would just tell you there's a change, not what the change was. So you've got a little bit more detail in yours. Okay.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
So I hope I've demonstrated why these things deserve our attention as security professionals, why visibility is critical, right? And again, visibility into those config changes, new configs, changed configs, deleted configs, stale users, user accounts without registered MFA devices. That's a big one, right? Active and enabled user account and intro without an MFA device. It's an open door waiting to happen. And enterprise applications. Visibility into those things is critical. And why governance of all of those things is critical. And then the importance of config backup and recovery. Yes, sir.
Security baseline, configuration baselines, one size really never fits all between different companies and so forth. And I know that there is a number of examples that are available. But generally, these things do evolve over time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that you're actually looking at things about, you add something new, or maybe there's a new feature to turn on or off, or maybe there's an existing feature that you find out it really isn't what you want, so you want to disable it or something. How do you deal with that evolution of your security baseline without causing havoc?
That's a great question. So Our solution is that you have a greenfield M365 tenant with minimal licensing in it. That is going to be your baseline tenant. That's not where your users live. It's not where your data lives. It's where your configs live. We capture that as a baseline, and then that gets applied to the tenants that you own. Now, if you're managing 4 different tenants, there's going to be some level of commonality across those tenants, right? Your minimal viable security standard that you want to apply to each one of those tenants. Each one of those tenants is also going to have their own snowflake configurations, absolutely. But you want to have a baseline for all of those tenants. That's the term baseline, right? So from there, that's where we're going to keep those configs. Now, if from our prod tenant or our dev tenant, we cook up new configurations and we decide we want those in our desired state baseline, our solution allows us to very quickly copy those configs into the baseline and then push those out to the tenants that are downstream from that baseline.
But you just said that you actually do your backups of the configurations, compare them and see if there's any change.
Yep.
So if you push that out, it would go against the previous backup.
Sure.
And you'd have a bunch of alerts.
Sure.
And so that's when the human comes in the loop there to make sure that you don't just overwrite it or something with it.
So when we push changes that we want to keep in our baseline, yeah, we're going to get an alert that says that those configs have changed in our baseline, but if they've been approved, they can be disregarded. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I'm just wondering where the holes might be in that process when somebody screws up or something like that, that they approve a change in the baseline that really shouldn't have been approved.
That's fair, yeah. I mean, that's we'd have to hold the approver's feet to the fire on that one, I think, you know. But if it turned out that shouldn't have been approved, you can just simply roll it right back to your last known good state.
Point.
But if you have an update, that still changes the baseline because the hash is going to be completely different.
When you have an update like Microsoft pushes out an update, yeah, sure, that's gonna apply to your baseline as well.
How is that? Well, if you compare the baseline to the new updated, let's say you had one a few years ago and you've been breached because somebody sent you email that they phished your email, and then you have updates and you're trying to go back, the new update is going to change the whole config. How are you going to get the baseline back if it's updated?
So there are some updates from Microsoft that cannot be undone, right? We can undo them temporarily, but they'll get pushed back down to us, and we just have to deal with that. So that's what I would say to that particular use case. Now, over time, yeah, configurations are going to evolve. They're absolutely going to evolve. So if I compared my tenant against what it looked like last year, the configurations are going to be different. But if I get breached today and I see that I have configuration changes tomorrow, and we look into those changes and say, who made these changes, where did they come from? If they're not legitimate, then we know that something's going wrong. We need to roll back to our known good state for our configurations. And that's going to be separate from Microsoft pushed updates. Does that answer your question?
No, I'm missing a gap. I'm missing how can you back to the baseline if, let's say, Microsoft roll out a new update, and they do every 6 months or 8 months, and then you got breached. Well, you're on the update. How are you going to make that update that time that you've been breached back? Because sometimes it takes 3 to 6 months to find out you've been breached.
Ah, that's the key, right? Is if you get notification about changing configurations, you're not going to have to wait 3 to 6 months. You'll get notification tomorrow that changes happened last night, or happened tonight.
Sometimes you can't detect it. It's not an easy.
That's what we do. We detect those changes and notify.
So what you're saying is after the update, you get a new baseline.
So,
Like a major update.
sure, if Microsoft pushes out an update to
'Cause I see
all
what she's
tenants.
saying. So if they update today, we get a baseline tomorrow so that we can notify on that baseline going forward from this point. So if we get breached, we can roll back to it.
Oh man, I wish I had a whiteboard. Because if Microsoft pushed out a change, our baseline's going to get that change, and our production tenant and our dev tenant, they're all going to get that change.
Right.
Right. So that we'll get
What are you
notified.
backing up to? Because if you're backing up here before the update, then that baseline's doing you no good, right?
Right.
I don't see it as doing no good. Everyone's going to get that update, right? So we'll get notified that everyone got that update, and we'll see, okay, Microsoft got that update. No big deal.
So the update's not changing any of the configurations, basically?
Well, the update could change configurations. If they push a configuration change update, it's coming downstream and everybody's going to get it.
Updates, what's the rollback? What is the baseline we're rolling back to?
Let's say Microsoft pushes out an update today, and all 4 tenants I manage get that update, right? We're going to get that update. We're going to get notification. Okay, fine. Disregard the notification. Microsoft pushed that. Next week, I get breached. And let's say next Monday morning, I get breached. Let's say it takes a week, 2 weeks before somebody finally registers that, okay, these configurations mean, config changes mean I've been breached. We could simply roll back to Sunday's backup. It would still include the update that was pushed from Microsoft today. It's not a problem.
That's no longer the baseline.
Sure it is. The baseline got updated, my production tenant got updated, my dev tenant got updated. Everybody's on the same sheet of music. Microsoft pushed out a change. Yes, sir. 1 second. I'll come right back to you. Yes, sir.
I think maybe some of the confusion I'm having and maybe others are having is, you know, the being able to roll back when, like, at what like level of granularity are like the snapshots being taken? Is it like each thing is like every single change you make has a specific point in time where you can rewind as far back as you want?
Let me get through this one slide. I'll take you through a quick demo, and I think it'll answer all these questions. Does that sound good to everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So, real quick, our mission at Coreview is to enable organizations like yours to anticipate, withstand, and recover from attacks in M365 environment. We saw this slide at the beginning, right? Okay, the tenant compromise, we help that out by enforcing zero trust access to manage at the management level for M365, making sure our operators have the right access and only the right access. Configuration tampering, this is where we get into detecting changes, configuration changes, and notifying you of those. Privilege elevation and lateral movement. Coreview segments M365 tenants to allow admins to just manage the objects they need to be able to manage. And that's more of an operational side of the house. I don't know if it resonates with the security team here, but we could dig into it if you'd like. Incident response and recovery. We're going to detect those changes, notify you, and give you the ability to rewind. And I'll show you what that looks like here in just 1 second. Adapt and improve. We minimize your attack surface by enforcing governance on the objects in M365 and governance on those tenant configurations. And that is the end of what I had queued up. Oh, wait, I had one more thing there. This note at the bottom. This came from Microsoft themselves. By deploying Coreview, enterprises gain robust resilience and compliance solutions that strengthen their security posture. And that came from Microsoft. So with that, let's take a look at what we're talking about here. So let me pull up my environment here. Not that, that's my keeper. Where did we go? Get the right browser, there we go. All right, so here we have the configuration manager solution. And give me 1 second. There we go. All right, so I have multiple tenants installed here, right? Now, what we're doing in this particular tenant, my PSA tenant, can you guys see this? Yeah. We are running a sync job every 24 hours. That's our default interval. Every 24 hours, we're backing up my tenant. As I mentioned earlier, when we back up this tenant, at the end of that sync job, we compare the output to the previous output and look for changes in those configurations. That's how we're able to identify change. So for instance, here on 6.3, this is that screenshot I showed you earlier. Deleted CA policy, modified CA policy, modified threat management policy, etc. Now let's say that prior to this, Microsoft had pushed out changes. Let's say these changes that were added and changed down here on 805.1, so yesterday, Microsoft pushed those changes out, and they pushed them out to every tenant. Every tenant's going to have those. My baseline tenant, where my configurations are stored, is going to have those, and so are my prod and my dev tenants. That now is just going to be baked into every tenant that's out there because Microsoft pushed those changes. Now, today, or on the 6th, we detected these changes here that we just took a look at. If I want to undo those, I can simply hit my Reconcile tab. I can compare my tenant to what it looked like in the backup just prior to where we picked up those changes on 806.3. I can compare against 806.2, load up a Reconcile view, and that's going to just show me those changes that happened at that point in time, right? Now, if this was 2 weeks ago, 2 months ago, I would have a list of all those changes that were made, those deltas that were made in that time frame. But those Microsoft changes are still there. They're still in my dev tenant. They're still in my baseline. They're still in my prod tenant. I don't want to undo those. I just want to undo the changes that were made during this breach, right? These ones that we got flagged and we got notified had happened. From there, I can simply go through the process to see those settings that are available from my backup, meaning these configurations are in my backup, but they're not in my production environment. These are deleted configurations. I can grab those from here. I can venture over to the conflicting with column. This is going to show me all the configs that existed in my backup prior to these unwanted changes. And they also exist in my prod environment, but there's a difference between those two. There's a delta. From there, I can dig into those a little bit, hit the view button on this rogue policy that was modified, load up a show diff. This is going to show me that these are new configurations. The things highlighted in green on the left, these are new excluded locations that are added to the CA policy that did not exist on the right-hand side in my backup, right? So from there, I simply select the option to say, yes, I want to use the settings from my backup over here rather than what's currently in my production. I want to undo the changes that were made.
So the granularity that he asked about, you can get down to
Yes.
exactly what the vector was that
Correct.
the bad guy came in on, and basically erase those tracks and get it back to
That's right.
a good state.
100%.
Okay.
Same thing with, we'll dig down to all these policies, right? We could go through that same process for my malware policy. We can hit that view button. We can see that everything previously was disabled, or was enabled rather, right? And now it is disabled. We can roll this back. We could get granular with that. We could say we just want to roll this setting back, or we could get everything here.
Does it save the information for the report that you have to write?
What's that?
Does it save the information for the report you have to write?
In the solution, yeah. And the same thing for, we'll go down to this threat management policy and pick on that one too, right? Same thing goes there. I could hit that view button, and from there we can see that my anti-phishing policy was all enabled. Now it's all disabled. We're going to roll all that back too. From there, this is where the change management comes in, right? I am as the operator here, I'm proposing these changes be undone in my production environment. I hit that reconcile button. From there, I can hit my sync now option. When I hit sync now, we're going to send an email out to the approvers that have been configured in the platform to come back in here and either approve or reject these changes to be pushed into my production environment. And this reconcile session that we have here, this is where I can compare my tenant against not just a backup. I can compare against my desired state baseline and make sure that I'm aligned and with that baseline and pull it back into alignment using this solution. And we can also compare with like the sys baseline that we have out of the box to be able to pull sys controls into our tenant and make sure we're sys aligned where it's applicable. Yes, sir.
From the Coreview side, if you see Microsoft pushes out an update and you see the changes reflected across, say, 20,000 organizations, is that something that you tend to let customers know, saying, hey, that we're seeing this widespread, this coincides with a Microsoft update for these specific values? Is that something that you'll send out a notification about, just so people are aware of what the changes are and why?
Not currently, no. That's a really good point, and I'll take that to the dev team that, if we see Microsoft pushing config changes out, that we should reach out to the user base and let them know that. Yeah, that's a great point. So does this help answer the question? I hope it does. I hope it does.
Also, I just say, like, before you do the change of the scene, it does another backup.
Yeah.
So you have a backup of the thing that you are going to do. So you can go back and change it too.
Does it also do a backup after the sync?
Yes.
Yep.
So after we push these changes back into our production environment, we run another step to do another sync and capture the state after we push those changes out. So that So if I hit sync now, approvers come in and approve these changes to be pushed, we run another sync so that if somebody comes in, in an hour from now and makes additional changes, we'll pick those up as well. Yeah. Yes.
Also, sorry, is there configuration bar dependencies? Will we pick that up too? Is smart enough, so to pick up dependencies on configurations too?
So I'm seeing that button there before the pop-up of the export report.
I'm sorry?
The export report.
Right there.
Is that
Yeah.
a condition that you're seeing now with the alerts, or is that gonna be something that you can do? It also shows up what you're pushing for the reconcile.
So the export report here, I'll go ahead and pull that down real quick. What that does is basically it just exports that view that we have in the background as an Excel spreadsheet. So you have that. That's really handy when I'm comparing against my desired state baseline, right? So I can see how my prod environment stacks up against my production environment, and then I have that Excel sheet takeaway, right? Oh, interesting. Where's my Excel? I'm not sure why that didn't pull up. Something's going on with my file associations. I apologize. But that's basically what I get is an Excel sheet takeaway of what I see here in the reconcile session.
On the left side, I see that it says report. Does that show a,
So that's going to take me to a Power BI report that will show me, it's basically a Power BI version of what we just looked at, how my tenant stacks up against its associated baseline is what that's going to pull up, and that's what we see here, right? So we can click through this and track that. We have a couple of other views where we can compare this by property and expand that out. But that's what we see there, is how compliant we are with our baseline from this report. We also pull this information into log analytics, so if you wanted a different report that you wanted to build, you could do that as well. Great questions. I think we're at the top of the hour. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Are you able to export the data out of this or integrate it into other systems for things like GitOps and things like that?
I don't believe so. No, I don't believe so. All right. Well, thank you all for your time.